Imagine a powerful empire in the Middle Ages, a kingdom of fierce steppe warriors who controlled the crossroads of the world. To their south, the mighty Islamic Caliphate was expanding with unstoppable force. To their west, the Christian Byzantine Empire dominated with its wealth and influence. Caught between these two superpowers, the empire's leaders made a decision so shocking, so unprecedented, that it still fascinates and provokes debate over 1,000 years later. They chose a third path. They converted to Judaism. Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're diving deep into the phantom empire of the steppe, the Khazar Khaganate. For over 300 years, from the 7th to the 11th centuries, the Khazars were the masters of Eastern Europe. They were a Turkic people, born from the chaos of collapsing steppe confederations, who built a sophisticated and wealthy empire. Their domain stretched from the Aral Sea to the Dnipro River, controlling the vital trade routes that connected Europe to Asia. This period of stability and security was so profound that historians call it the Pax Khazarica, the Khazar peace. Merchants from all over the known world flocked to their cities, bringing silks from China, spices from India, and silver from the Arab world. In the north, Scandinavian Vikings, known as the Rus, brought furs, honey, and slaves down the great rivers to trade in Khazar markets. The Khazars grew rich by taxing this trade, levying a 10% duty on all goods that passed through their lands. But the most fascinating aspect of their state wasn't its wealth, but its bizarre political structure. The Khazars were ruled by two kings. At the top was the Khagan, a sacred spiritual leader who was seen as semi-divine. He held immense prestige but almost no real power. He lived in total seclusion, and his well-being was believed to guarantee the prosperity of the entire empire. This sacred status came at a terrifying price. According to Arab chroniclers, if the empire suffered a disaster like a famine, a drought, or a military defeat, it was seen as a sign that the Khagan's divine fortune had run out. The nobility could then demand his execution. His reign was tied to the fate of the nation in the most literal way possible. The person who held the actual power was the second king, known as the Bek. The Bek was the commander-in-chief of the army, the chief judge, and the head of the government. He led the armies, met with foreign ambassadors, and made all the critical decisions. While the Khagan reigned, the Bek ruled. This strange system allowed the Khazars to separate the sacred, legitimizing authority of the Khagan from the messy, practical business of running an empire. And they would need all the practical leadership they could get because a storm was gathering on their southern border. In the mid-7th century, the armies of the newly formed Islamic Caliphate exploded out of Arabia, conquering everything in their path. They crushed the Persian Empire and seized huge territories from the Byzantines. By the 640s, they reached the Caucasus Mountains, the southern frontier of the Khazar Empire. What followed was a century of brutal conflict known as the Arab-Khazar Wars. The Caliphate, used to swift victories, found a formidable and stubborn opponent in the Khazars. The war reached its climax in the year 730. A massive Khazar army invaded the Caliphate, annihilated an Arab army at the Battle of Ardabil, and raided as far south as modern-day Iraq, creating panic across the region. The Caliphate responded with overwhelming force, and in 737, an enormous Arab army managed to push deep into Khazar territory and even briefly capture their capital city. The Khazar Khagan was forced to accept Islam under duress. But as soon as the Arab army withdrew, the Khazars renounced the conversion and reasserted their independence. Although they had suffered a defeat, the Khazars had achieved something of world historical importance. They had acted as a massive bulwark, absorbing the full force of the Caliphate's northern expansion and stopping it from pouring into Eastern Europe. But this long and bitter struggle left the Khazar leadership in a precarious position. They were caught between two monolithic religious superpowers. Converting to Islam would mean submitting to the authority of the Caliph. Converting to Christianity would make their king a spiritual subject of the Byzantine emperor. They needed a third option, an ideology that would grant them the prestige of a major monotheistic faith, but without the political baggage. And so, sometime around the late 8th or early 9th century, the Khazar Bek and the ruling class made their extraordinary choice. They adopted Judaism. According to the historical sources, including a famous exchange of letters known as the Khazar Correspondence, the Khazar king summoned representatives from Christianity, Islam, and Judaism to debate the merits of their faiths. In one version of the story, the king cleverly asks the Christian which religion is better, Judaism or Islam. The Christian, acknowledging Judaism as the parent faith, chooses Judaism. The king then asks the Muslim the same question, and he too concedes the ancient truth of Judaism over Christianity. Seeing that both of his rivals deferred to Judaism, the king made his decision. This conversion was a brilliant geopolitical masterstroke. Judaism was a venerable religion of the book, but it had no central political power like a pope or a caliphate who could claim authority over the Khazar state. It gave them ideological independence. Now, it's crucial to understand that this was almost certainly an elite conversion. The Khazar king, his nobles, and the core of the army became Jewish. But the wider empire remained a mosaic of faiths. Christians, Muslims, and pagans continued to live and worship freely. In fact, the Khazar capital of Atil was famous for its Supreme Court of Justice, which was made up of Jewish, Muslim, and Christian judges, each ruling according to their own religious law. For nearly 2 centuries, this unique Jewish kingdom thrived. But the very stability of the Khazar peace had allowed new, dangerous powers to grow in their shadow. From the north came the Rus, the Scandinavian Vikings who had once been trading clients of the Khazars. Now, united in a powerful new state based in Kiev, they saw the Khazars as an obstacle to their ambitions. From the east came the Pechenegs, a fierce new wave of nomadic warriors who swept across the steppe, cutting off Khazaria's vital trade routes to the west. The Khazar Empire was caught in a pincer. The death blow came in the 960s, delivered by a ruthless Rus, prince named Sviatoslav. Sviatoslav was a pure warrior who cared only for conquest. Around the year 965, he launched a devastating campaign designed to obliterate Khazar power forever. He first captured the great Khazar fortress of Sarkel on the Don River. Then he swept down the Volga and fell upon the capital, Atil. The Khazar army was crushed in a final, desperate battle. Sviatoslav's warriors plundered the great trading metropolis and burned it to the ground. An Arab chronicler writing shortly after described the utter devastation, stating the Rus destroyed it all. In a single, catastrophic campaign, Sviatoslav had shattered the Khazar state. The empire that had dominated Eastern Europe for 300 years effectively ceased to exist. So what happened to the Khazar people? The state was gone, but the population scattered. Most were likely absorbed into other steppe tribes, like the Pechenegs and later the Cumans. Some Khazar Jewish communities migrated westward, joining existing Jewish populations in Kievan Rus or Hungary. And this leads us to the most controversial part of the Khazar legacy. In 1976, an author named Arthur Kustler published a book called The 13th Tribe. In it, he argued that the majority of modern Eastern European, or Ashkenazi, Jews were not descended from the ancient Israelites of the Middle East, but from these converted Khazars who had migrated west. This idea, known as the Khazar-Ashkenazi hypothesis, became incredibly popular. It seemed to solve a demographic puzzle about the origins of the large Jewish population in Eastern Europe. However, despite its popular appeal, the Khazar hypothesis has been overwhelmingly rejected by mainstream historians, linguists, and geneticists. The evidence against it is simply too strong. First, dozens of major genetic studies have consistently shown that Ashkenazi Jews trace their primary ancestry not to Turkic peoples of the Caucasus, but to the Middle East, clustering closely with other Jewish groups and Levantine populations. Second, the Yiddish language, the historical language of Ashkenazi Jews, is a High German dialect, not a Turkic one. Finally, there is simply no historical or archaeological evidence of a mass migration of Khazars westward on the scale Kostler's theory would require. Today, the theory is primarily used by anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist groups to try and sever the ancestral connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. The scholarly consensus is clear. The Khazars are a fascinating piece of history, but they are not the primary ancestors of Ashkenazi Jews. The true legacy of the Khazars is what they actually did. They were a geopolitical shield that protected Eastern Europe from conquest, creating the space for nations like Russia and Ukraine to emerge. Their conversion was a unique and daring act of statecraft, a masterclass in navigating a world of competing superpowers. And their fall is a stark reminder that even the mightiest empires can vanish, leaving behind mysteries that fascinate us centuries later. So what are your thoughts on this? Let us know down in the comments. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like. And don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.